Luther's small catechism, sixth commandment in the explanation, which we'll read responsibly. You shall not commit adultery. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, so we lead a sexually pure and decent life in what we say and do, and husband and wife love and honor each other. In Jesus' name, amen. We hear again from the only words that God wrote with his own hand in the Bible, the Ten Commandments. He wrote in stone and gave to Moses. The rest was transcribed by prophets, carried along by the Holy Spirit, as the scriptures say. But this is important stuff. Nowadays, people act as though they're the 10 suggestions. You know, if you feel like it, you might do it. Others come up with their own list, what they're good at. And then the reality is that the 10 Commandments hammer all of us. You might do well at one or two of the commandments, or 3 or 4 of them, and actual deed maybe. But then you realize there's others that you struggle with, and that I struggle with. And really, the heart and core of it, Jesus says, it's about love. Loving God and loving our neighbor. In other words, and it's not our earthly definition of love. It's this divine definition of sacrificial giving of oneself for God and neighbor, which all of us fail at. But you know, back in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve. And they had this perfect relationship. God officiated at their wedding in the Garden of Eden. And it wasn't long after there's the fall into sin. And then there's God asking why Adam did it, and he's blaming Eve. It's that woman you gave me. She made me do it. I can just imagine, all of us could imagine the talk that Eve had with Adam later after God was gone. You said, what? You know where you're going to be sleeping for the next week? Under the fig tree. But this brokenness in relationships, and we see it in Cain and Abel, and we see it throughout the Old Testament. We see it today in our lives and in the news. But here in the commandments, the sixth commandment, there's addressed the closest relationship you can ever have, and the worst thing that could possibly ever happen to it: betrayal of trust. But addressed in this is every form of unchastity, in thought, word, and deed. Back in the Old Testament times, kids were betrothed at very young ages. I mean, they would work out deals between families, and they say, well, my son, when he grows up, well, I think he should marry your daughter. Yeah, that looks good, you know, and figure out, you know, be able to inherit adjoining farms and things like that, but they worked it out at young ages. They got married young. I mean, they died young. And so, but it addresses everything. Everything has to do with our sexuality. And there's a real problem today if you don't know. If you don't know, you've been hiding under some rock somewhere, but it's really scary to find out the details. In Iowa, I did some research. I found 25% of high schoolers had STDs. 25, and this is Midwest, small town Iowa, 25% of high schoolers had STDs. 50% of those who were, shall we say, active, would have an STD. 50% of them would have STDs by the time they were 25 years old. Alaska ranks #1 for the most common form of STD. And there was a New York Times article that said there's 110 million reported cases of STDs in our country. And it doesn't mean there's 110 million people, but that's a horrific number. educate kids? And I was wondering about talking about this today. We've got a lot of kids in our congregation, and they need to listen in on these conversations. And I hope they're asking mom and dad on the way home, what are some of these things that Pastor Carlson was talking about? There's importance of teaching our kids to flee temptation. There's children's books from CPH that Dana and I shared with our kids. They're age appropriate. It says for ages 6 to 10. You know, you read this book and talks about our bodies and things like that. In fact, there's Catholic schools that buy these textbooks and share them with their kids because they don't have anything like that in their schools. But it's so important for us as parents to talk to our children. And it's something that Pastor Carlson isn't afraid of talking about. And I'll talk about it from the pulpit. Because it's important. You know, another problem is there's 50% of marriages in the United States end divorce. And the figure for Christian couples isn't much different. It's only off by a couple percentage points. It might be 48%. And there's a real problem. And what I've seen over the years is that there's this bailing too quick, and then also some of the other things like violation of a person's trust that can end a relationship. But a lot of young people, the going gets tough and they get going. And one of my words of encouragement is to hang in there, to work out these differences. And there are, sad to say, circumstances of abuse and where somebody's betrayed the marriage vows. And it isn't part of God's plan. It isn't part of God's plan, and any Christian that's been through a divorce would say that. It's an ugly thing. And it's like other sins that we all struggle, and we all are in need of God's grace and forgiveness. There's also a rising percentage in our country of single people. The trend is waiting longer and longer before marriage. And we're not designed to be celibate. And very few people have the gift of celibacy. And so as people wait longer and longer for marriage, there's more and more things that happen outside of marriage. I remember Doc and I on the ship had talks with sailors. Sailors of all people, they spend months at sea, pent up on a ship, and they get into port, and they often drink beverages other than soft drinks and get into trouble. And they're young. The average age is 19, and the captain said she wanted to have some basic life skills classes with these the junior enlisted. And one of the subjects was intimacy. And I titled it Recreational versus Relational Intimacy. Doc did the section on if you see it as a recreational activity, and he said there's 33 funky things that can grow on you and in you. And they hurt, they can cause, many of them cause early death, premature death, infertility, all this stuff. And he would go, and the sailors were just pale by the time he was done. And they said, we've never had a blunt and open talk with anybody about this subject. In fact, in high school, the school nurse would just say, hey, if you are active, come by the office and I'll give you some stuff. Protection. He says there's a 3 to 5% failure rate of quote-unquote protection. By that point, the sailors were really scared. And I would talk to them about that our sexuality is about for relationship. It's this intimate bond. It isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's in fact, the Hebrew word is the old King James word, to know. Adam knew Eve, and she conceived. And then the Hebrew word is yada, to know in every way. And this wonderful, intimate relationship you can have with somebody. It was back when I was 17, I met a young gal, last name Gadbury. And I really loved her. We dated for a year and a half, we were engaged for 6 months, and we got married. I was 19 and she was 18. And I don't regret it. And we'll be having our 32nd anniversary this summer. You should see our wedding picture. It looks like we're kids. I was only shaving once a week when we got married. Well, this gal, I want to grow up. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. There's been times, and you ask Dana, and she'll be honest with you, there's times when she wanted to, well, choke me. And times when I didn't care, wasn't real happy with her either. And those happen. That's part of any kind of relationship. But this intimate relationship, that God teaches us something about our relationship with Him. The closest relationship we can ever have is with God. The next closest relationship is with our spouse. And there's a lot He has to teach us about what real love is. It's not about gimme, 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 and satisfying our desires and such. It's about the sacrificial giving of oneself for another person. And when you lose yourself in service to another person, your spouse, it's amazing the intimacy that can result. And yet there's the guy who wrote the Psalms, David in the Bible, messed up big time. First he committed adultery, then he murdered the husband of the gal that he committed adultery with. And we have Psalm 38 and Psalm 51 as the Psalms of confession, as he poured out his heart to God, asking for forgiveness. God forgave him. God forgave him. And not only adultery, but then murder. And there were consequences. There were problems in his family as a result of this. And there's people that, and I told sailors this, I said you can sow your wild oats, and most people do sow a few wild oats at least. But remember, they sprout. There's consequences to everything we do. God has a plan for us, and that plan is marriage. Marriage, we have a window into our relationship with Jesus. And this sacrificial giving of Himself for us, and our giving back in return to Him. What a beautiful thing to learn about in this relationship called marriage. May God strengthen all of us, and especially these kids in our congregation. And I've got a challenge ahead of them in this road called discipleship. May the Holy Spirit protect you and keep you in His tender care. Amen. Now the peace of God.